On a winter afternoon just hours after their vows, a bride and groom thought their only journey would be photographs, laughter, and the warmth of a new beginning. But deep in the snowy forest, fate split their path. The groom, with his loyal German shepherd at his side, followed tracks through the pines, and what he found froze his heart. His bride, torn and trembling, lay wounded in the snow, clutching a veil marked with a sign no one could explain. What she whispered would unravel secrets buried in the mountains, test their love, and turn their wedding day into a fight for truth and survival. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let this story travel farther than the storm that began it. The town of Pinefall, nestled in the lower arms of the Colorado Rockies, was no stranger to winter's cruelty. On that particular afternoon, the air held a sharpness that burned the lungs with every breath. The sky was a steel-gray canvas stretched taut above the snow-drowned earth, while pine trees hunched under the weight of fresh powder, their branches drooping like tired sentinels. The wind moved in sudden gusts, biting against exposed skin and rattling the brittle wood of fences that lined the silent road leading out of town. In such weather, most townsfolk sought warmth inside their cabins, or the few shops still open. Yet one couple, still in the glow of their wedding vows, had chosen to step deeper into the wilderness, seeking to preserve memories in the haunting beauty of the snow. Archer Whitman was not a man easily rattled by the cold. At 34 years old, his life had been defined by work that thrived in harsh climates. A carpenter and craftsman, he bore the ruggedness of someone accustomed to shaping wood with calloused hands and a patient heart. Archer's frame was broad and sturdy, his shoulders squared by years of hauling lumber, his jaw marked with the faint shadow of stubble that never seemed fully shaved away. His eyes, a muted hazel, often carried the solemn calm of a man who had endured losses early in life. His father's sudden death in a mill accident had forced him to take responsibility long before he was ready, shaping him into someone steady, dependable, almost unshakable. On his wedding day, though, beneath the severe lines of his face, there was a softness, an eagerness to finally anchor himself to something brighter than toil. His bride was that brightness. Lila Hart was 29, slender yet resilient, with the gentle composure of someone used to guiding restless children through lessons and quarrels. As a primary school teacher, she had built her world around patience and compassion, but also discipline. She stood just under 5'6", her frame delicate in a lace gown, now layered with a wool shawl against the cold. Her skin bore the pale flush of winter, her cheeks reddened by both the weather and the emotions of the day. Her hair, a chestnut brown with natural curls that refused to be tamed, was pinned loosely beneath a veil that fluttered like a pale flag in the wind. Her green eyes, bright and keen, held both warmth and fire. She was a woman who noticed details others overlooked, the sort of person who would pause to comfort a lost child on the street or to scold a man who spoke with cruelty. For Archer, she was both a balm and a challenge, someone who coaxed out the tenderness buried beneath his stoicism. For Lila, Archer represented safety, the solid walls of a cabin against the storm. With them trotted Atlas, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a sable and black coat that rippled with each stride. Atlas was large, standing proud even against Archer's tall frame, his amber eyes alert and intelligent. Trained originally in search and rescue, Atlas had become Archer's companion after being retired from a volunteer unit that scoured the mountains for lost hikers. His body was lean but powerful, his movements deliberate, always scanning, always sensing. To strangers, Atlas could appear intimidating, his low growl enough to still careless intruders, But to Archer and Lila, he was family. Loyal, protective, and almost uncannily attuned to danger, Atlas was the quiet shadow that gave their union an extra thread of strength. The three of them had agreed to humor the photographer's suggestion. A final set of wedding portraits taken in the snow-laden forest outside Pinefall, where the stark beauty of the land would frame their new beginning. The photographer, Jeremy Collins, was a local in his late 40s, known for his easy chatter and a fondness for capturing rustic weddings. A lean man with a salt and pepper beard and glasses that constantly fogged in the cold, Jeremy was practical, good-natured, and had been hired because he understood the couple's desire for simplicity. His plan was ambitious: 2 vantage points to capture the light as it dimmed over the ridge. One path led down toward a frozen creek where reflections danced faintly. The other climbed a ridge that overlooked the valley. They would split briefly, Archer and Atlas taking the creek path, Lila and Jeremy climbing higher to catch the sun before it dipped. They agreed to meet where the trails converged near a fallen pine. At first, the separation seemed harmless. The snow crunched beneath Archer's boots as he moved along the icy ribbon of creek, Atlas bounding ahead with ears pricked, nose low to the ground. Archer occasionally glanced back, watching Lila's figure, so delicate against the forest's starkness, fade into the distance, her veil fluttering like a ghostly wing. He felt the familiar tug of worry in his chest, but pushed it aside. This was her day, too, her request for pictures among the pines, and he would not deny her. Atlas trotted back once, brushing against Archer's leg, as though sensing his unease, then bounded forward again. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a deep groan as though the forest itself exhaled. Archer paused, scanning the treetops just as a sharp crack split the silence. A massive branch, heavy with ice, snapped and tumbled downward, shattering against the trail behind him. The sound echoed like gunfire. Atlas barked sharply, muscles tensed, his amber eyes fixed toward the ridge. Archer's heart hammered. He turned, half expecting to see Lila and Jeremy re-emerge, but the trail behind was empty. He retraced his steps quickly, Atlas bounding beside him. The climb was steeper than he remembered, the snow slick underfoot. Halfway up, something caught his eye. A camera half buried in the snow, lens cracked, strap tangled in the roots of a tree. Jeremy's. Archer's stomach dropped. He called out, his voice swallowed by the wind. No answer. Atlas growled low, circling the spot, nose digging into the snow as though searching for a scent. Archer's pulse quickened as he spotted footprints, 2 sets, leading deeper into the trees. One stride steady, the other uneven, dragging slightly. His chest tightened. Lila. The footprints veered sharply toward a stand of pines where the snow was churned up in strange patterns. Archer's breath fogged heavily as he pushed forward, his boots crunching the ice crust. Then he saw her. Lila lay slumped against the trunk of a tree, half buried in snow. Her gown was torn, lace muddied, her shawl missing. Blood marked her left shoulder, seeping slowly through the fabric where a sharp edge had cut deep. Her hands were limp in her lap, her veil twisted around one arm. Archer's throat closed. He stumbled forward, dropping to his knees beside her, brushing snow from her pale face. Her lips were blue, her breathing shallow. She stirred faintly at his touch, eyelids fluttering, whispering something too faint to hear before slipping back into unconsciousness. Atlas stood rigid nearby, his growl low and unrelenting. The shepherd's nose pointed toward the trees beyond, tail stiff, ears pinned forward. Archer followed his gaze, but the forest held only shadows and silence. He forced himself to focus, pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around Lila's trembling body. As he shifted her, something fell from the folds of her veil, a scrap of cloth streaked with bright red paint, not blood but pigment, smeared deliberately. Archer's eyes narrowed. It was no random accident. Someone had marked her. Cradling Lila against him, Archer rose, his muscles straining under her weight. The world around him had narrowed to the sound of her weak breaths and the steady crunch of Atlas's paws in the snow. He turned his back to the forest and began the slow trek toward the cabin his father had built years ago on the edge of Pinefall. A place of warmth, of memory, a place that might yet keep her alive. Behind him, Atlas cast one last glance into the trees, his teeth bared in silent promise. Whatever danger lingered in that forest had not finished with them. But neither had he. The cabin stood on the edge of the forest like a sentinel carved out of memory and labor. Built decades ago by Archer Whitman's father, it was a modest structure of pine logs and stone chimney, its beams worn smooth from winters survived and summers repaired. To Archer, the cabin was more than shelter. It was inheritance, grief, and survival fused into 4 walls. The wood still carried faint notches where his father's chisel had slipped, imperfections Archer had never sanded away, as though the mistakes held as much value as the straight lines. Tonight, under a veil of snow and cold that pressed against the roof, it became something else entirely. A sanctuary for a wounded bride, and the only place Archer trusted against the storm of both weather and men. Inside, the air was warmer, but carried the scent of resin and ash. The fire he had stoked flared and crackled, casting gold across the rough floorboards. Archer set Lila gently on the narrow bed near the hearth. Her skin looked ghostly pale in the firelight, her lips dry and colorless, her chest rising shallowly beneath the torn lace of her gown. With hands practiced in practical tasks, he pulled a wooden chest from beneath the bed and retrieved a worn leather satchel of supplies. His father had always insisted that a man in the mountains should keep rope, tools, and medicine at hand. Archer's broad fingers were steady as he unwound a bandage, his jaw tightening as he cut away the shredded fabric from her shoulder. The wound was shallow but ugly, a gash where glass or metal had carved through. He cleaned it with alcohol, ignoring the way she flinched even in unconsciousness, then bound it tight with strips of cloth. His movements were firm but careful, the patience of a carpenter turned into healing. Atlas stationed himself at the cabin door, body rigid, nose close to the crack where cold air seeped in. Every so often his ears pricked, and a growl rippled in his chest, low and dangerous. The German shepherd's fur bristled each time wind shifted, as though he could sense something more than weather. Footsteps, perhaps, or eyes lingering beyond the trees. Archer glanced at him once, meeting the animal's amber gaze. They had hunted together, tracked lost hikers together. Archer trusted that instinct more than his own. Lila stirred at last. Her eyelashes fluttered open, revealing eyes that glistened green, even dulled by exhaustion. She tried to sit, wincing at the pain in her shoulder, but Archer pressed her gently back with one hand. "Easy," he murmured, his deep voice roughened by fatigue. She swallowed, throat raw, and managed a whisper. They were waiting. Her words trembled, part fear, part fury. Men wearing coats with the mill's emblem stitched on. I thought they were locals. They weren't. They grabbed me before Jeremy could react. I fought, pulled free, but one of them slashed at me. Then everything blurred. Her voice faltered, eyes clouding with tears she refused to let fall. I don't know what happened to Jeremy. Archer's jaw tightened. Jeremy Collins, the photographer, had been harmless, maybe careless, but certainly not someone who would vanish willingly. Archer knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep, but the weight in his chest told him he would have to search. Still, Lila came first. "You're safe here," he said, though the growl of Atlas at the door made the words feel fragile. Her hand trembled as she reached for her veil, the fabric torn and dirty. She drew it close as if remembering something. "They didn't see," she whispered, "but I felt it. Something sewn into the seam." She tugged at a frayed edge, her fingers clumsy but determined, until a small glint of plastic emerged. Archer leaned forward, brow furrowing as he took it. A micro SD card, small enough to disappear in the weave of lace, hidden so cleverly that only chance or intuition could reveal it. He turned it in his palm, its black casing unremarkable, but his instincts told him it was no ordinary trinket. He rose, crossed to the wooden desk by the window, and retrieved a battered laptop, a relic he used for bookkeeping and the occasional order placed with suppliers. It whirred to life reluctantly, its fan rattling like old lungs. Archer inserted the card, his eyes narrowing as folders appeared on the screen. Inside were images, dozens of photographs of shipping crates stacked in dimly lit warehouses. He clicked through them, noting the markings on the wood. Some codes were hastily painted, others scratched out and replaced. But beneath the sloppiness was a pattern. These weren't just lumber crates. They were something else disguised as wood. He scrolled further. Grainy pictures showed men unloading boxes into trucks with tarps thrown carelessly across them. In one corner of a photo, Archer spotted a familiar symbol, the Pinefall Lumber Company emblem. His chest grew heavy. That mill had shut down years ago, bankrupt after years of mismanagement. Yet here it was, resurrected as a shield for something far darker. He leaned back, eyes shadowed. Lila sat up weakly, watching him. "So it's real," she said softly, her voice threaded with dread. "I thought maybe it was all just rumors. Teachers hear things from parents, whispers about jobs that don't exist, trucks that drive at night. But to see it..." Her words trailed off. The strength in her was not the strength of muscle, but of spirit. She was a woman who faced storms in the classroom daily, who bore the burden of small-town gossip and expectations, yet still stood. But this was heavier than schoolyard troubles. Archer shut the laptop gently, aware of the storm gathering outside both the cabin and their lives. "This wasn't chance," he said, his voice low. "That card didn't just end up in your veil. Someone put it there, someone who wanted it hidden, and those men knew enough to come for you." His eyes flicked toward Atlas, who had not moved from his guard at the door, his body taut with vigilance. Archer rubbed a hand over his stubbled jaw. "Which means this isn't over." Outside, the wind howled, slamming snow against the shutters. Atlas's growl deepened, his nose pressing harder against the crack beneath the door. Archer reached for the old hunting rifle that rested above the mantel, a weapon handed down from his father. He checked the chamber, loaded it with deliberate precision, then set it within reach, his storm-gray eyes fixed on Lila, softer now. "Rest," he told her. "I'll keep watch." But as he sat near the fire, Atlas bristling at his side, Archer knew rest was a luxury neither of them would claim. Beyond the timber walls, in the endless dark of the forest, men moved with purpose, and now, in his hands, was proof they would kill to reclaim. Morning in Pinefall broke reluctantly, the sun a thin pale disk behind a veil of cloud, light spilling across streets half buried in snow. Chimneys exhaled smoke into the brittle air, while the occasional pickup truck rattled past, tires crunching on ice. The world looked quiet, but Archer Whitman knew better. His father's cabin had given them one night of uneasy refuge, and though Lila slept in relative warmth, the memory of men in millcoats haunted him. By dawn, he had made up his mind. They needed supplies, and they needed to appear ordinary, if only for a moment. Lila dressed in plain clothes she found in Archer's cedar chest, wool trousers and a thick flannel shirt once his, sleeves rolled at her wrists, the fabric heavy against her slender frame. She still looked fragile, her skin pale from blood loss, her shoulders stiff beneath the bandage, but her green eyes carried fire again. She refused to stay behind. Archer, storm-gray eyes unreadable, simply nodded. Beside them, Atlas shook snow from his sable and black coat, his ears pricked, tail held stiffly as if he knew the day would demand his vigilance. Rosie's diner stood on the corner of Main Street, its neon sign flickering defiantly against the gloom. It was a low brick building with wide windows fogged from the heat inside. A bell jingled when Archer pushed the door open, holding it for Lila as Atlas padded in behind them. The smell of bacon grease and coffee clung to the air, comforting in its familiarity. Behind the counter stood Rosie Carter herself, a woman in her mid-50s with a broad frame softened by years, but strength still visible in the set of her shoulders. She wore her blonde hair short, streaked with gray, and her blue eyes were sharp as cut glass. Her apron was flour-dusted, her hands calloused from decades of flipping pancakes and scrubbing pots. Rosie had been born in Pinefall, raised 3 children here, and ran the diner like a fortress of warmth for locals and strangers alike. She greeted Archer with a nod, her gravelly voice steady. "Morning, Whitman. Brought company today." Her gaze flicked to Lila, then to Atlas, and her brow furrowed slightly, though she asked no questions. They slid into a corner booth, Atlas sitting at Archer's feet, his amber eyes scanning the room. Most of the patrons were ranch hands in denim jackets or loggers still dusted with sawdust, but a silence lingered in their glances. Pinefall was small. New faces, or old faces in strange contexts, were always noticed. Rosie poured them coffee without asking, her hand steady, then leaned close as she set the cups down. "Strange nights lately," she murmured, her voice low enough only Archer and Lila could hear. "Trucks running through after midnight. Cross the old steel bridge, smell like chemicals spilled from a barrel. Folks pretend not to see, but I've been around long enough. Something's wrong." She straightened, smile polite again, then turned to serve another table. Before Archer could reply, Atlas's ears snapped forward, his body going rigid. He barked once, loud and sharp, startling the diner. Archer's eyes followed the dog's line of sight through the window. Parked across the street was a dark red pickup, its engine idling, tinted windows concealing the driver. Atlas's growl rose, low and steady, his hackles bristling. For a moment the truck lingered, then, under the weight of attention, it pulled away, tires spitting slush. The chatter in the diner resumed, but Archer's jaw remained tight. Lila tried to steady her hands on the coffee cup, but the tremor gave her away. "They followed us," she whispered. Archer didn't argue. He reached down, brushing his hand across Atlas's head. "Good work, boy," he said softly. The shepherd's tail thumped once, though his eyes never left the window. The door chimed again, and a young man stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. He was barely 20, lean and lanky, with sandy hair tucked under a knit cap and wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose. His face was still soft with youth, but his hands were marked with paper cuts and ink stains. This was Henry Dalton, who worked at the Pinefall post office, sorting packages and manning the counter during late-night shifts. Once a boy in Lila's classroom, he had grown into a young man with earnest brown eyes and the awkward courtesy of someone still unsure of his place. When his gaze landed on Lila, recognition lit his face. "Miss Hart?" he said, voice cracking with surprise. "I mean, Mrs. Whitman now, right? I almost didn't recognize you." His cheeks flushed red as he pushed his glasses up nervously. Lila smiled faintly, though exhaustion shadowed her features. "Henry Dalton, I remember you. You used to bring stray cats into class when you were 9. I had to convince you to let them go before your mother found out." Henry chuckled, embarrassed. "Guess I haven't changed much. Still can't leave strays alone?" He glanced around, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You know, I saw something last week. Packages. Not normal ones. Big crates marked as lumber, but they came in at midnight. No paperwork, no return address. The driver said they had to go out before dawn. I thought it was strange, but nobody else seemed to notice. The crates smelled chemical, not wood. I figured if anyone should know, it'd be you, Miss Hart." His eyes flicked nervously toward Archer, then to Atlas, whose steady stare made him shift his weight uncomfortably. Archer studied the young man, noting the tremor in his hands, the sincerity in his eyes. Henry wasn't lying. His honesty was clumsy, but clear. "Keep that to yourself," Archer said quietly, his tone measured. "You did the right thing, telling us. But you don't mention it again. Not to anyone, understand?" Henry nodded quickly, though the unease lingered. He muttered something about getting to work, and slipped. Out again, the bell over the door jangling behind him. Lila watched him go, then turned to Archer. "It's connected. The photos, the trucks, the crates at the post office, it's all the same." Her voice wavered, but her eyes were steady. "We can't just sit in that cabin." Archer took a long sip of coffee, his expression unreadable. The decision had already been made in his mind, even before Lila spoke. "We'll take the card to Maeve Carver," he said at last. "Sheriff's the only one with the tools to pull everything from it. She's tough, been keeping Pinefall in line for 20 years. If there's rot in the old mill, she'll dig it out. But the rest—" He glanced at Atlas, whose head rested against his knee, amber eyes still burning with alertness. "The rest we handle ourselves. You, me, and him." Lila exhaled slowly, some tension easing from her shoulders. She reached down, brushing her fingers against Atlas's fur, grateful for his warmth. For the first time since the forest, she allowed herself to believe they weren't completely powerless. As they rose to leave, Rosie appeared again, sliding a paper bag across the counter toward them. "Sandwiches," she said briskly, but her sharp blue eyes softened. "On the house. If you're heading back up the mountain, you'll need them." She paused, lowering her voice. "Keep your heads down. This town's smaller than it looks. Trouble doesn't stay hidden long." Archer gave her a short nod of thanks, the kind that carried weight without words. With Lila at his side and Atlas trotting close, he pushed open the diner door. The cold bit hard again, but his resolve was steel. The red pickup was gone, but the echo of its engine still haunted the street. He knew they would be back. For now, though, they had a direction. Sheriff Maeve Carver would see the truth in the card. And Archer, Lila, and Atlas would follow the trail into the mountains, where shadows hid more than snow. Snow fell in fitful bursts as Archer Whitman guided Lila along the narrow trail that cut upward through the pines. The world had grown quieter with each step away from Pinefall, the sounds of town life replaced by the groan of trees shifting beneath their burden of ice. Atlas led the way, his powerful frame steady on the uneven ground, nose low, tail stiff with focus. His coat, sable and black, bristled each time the wind shifted, and his amber eyes scanned the world with ceaseless vigilance. Archer trusted that dog's instincts more than his own sense of direction. Atlas was following something the human nose could not, an acrid tang of chemicals, sharp and wrong against the clean breath of snow. Lila moved behind Archer, her wool scarf pulled high against the cold, her cheeks flushed from the climb. She was still weakened from her wound, her shoulder bound in Archer's careful bandages, but stubbornness burned in her green eyes. She refused to stay behind, and Archer knew better than to argue. She had always been willful. He had admired that in the classroom years ago, when she defied her colleagues' cautious silence and spoke out against unfairness, and he admired it now, even if it cost him peace of mind. By late afternoon, the forest broke into a clearing carved by men, not nature. The ground was beaten down into icy mud, and the skeletal frames of makeshift shacks leaned drunkenly against one another. A generator hummed, coughing out fumes that clashed with the scent of pine. Stacks of lumber, uneven and hastily piled, framed the edges of the camp. But these were no ordinary lumber stores. Archer's sharp eyes noted the markings on the crates, numbers scrawled and scratched out, replaced by fresh paint. The deception was sloppy, but deliberate. Near the heart of the camp, a group of men gathered around a fire pit. They passed bottles back and forth, their laughter loud and coarse, smoke curling into the gray sky. One man, broad-shouldered and still carrying the heaviness of strength despite his sagging posture, leaned forward in his chair with a familiarity that struck Lila like a blow. Her breath caught, and her face paled beneath her scarf. "That's Buck Rendell," she whispered, voice sharp with recognition. Buck Rendell had once been a name spoken often in Pinefall. Years ago he had been the mill's foreman, a man in his late 40s with arms thick from decades of swinging axes and overseeing crews. His hair, once coal-black, had thinned and streaked with gray, but the set of his jaw was still severe, marked by a scar that cut from his cheekbone to his chin, a relic of a bar fight gone sour in his youth. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and carried the bitter edge of a man who believed the world owed him. Dismissed from the mill for skimming wages and picking fights with workers, Buck had vanished from town, but whispers followed. Whispers of debts, of gambling, of work with men better left unnamed. Now here he sat, head tipped back in cruel laughter, presiding over this camp as if it were his throne. Archer studied him through the gap in the pines. Buck was surrounded by 5 or 6 others, all rough men with weather-beaten faces and the look of those hardened by choices made in dark places. One was a thin, wiry figure with a crooked nose and restless hands that flicked constantly, as though he couldn't bear stillness. Another, tall with a shaggy beard, leaned heavily on a limp, the result of some old injury that hadn't healed right. They were not loggers anymore. They were smugglers and thugs, their laughter edged with menace. Atlas's body stiffened. He lowered himself into a crouch, nose twitching, ears pricked forward. He slunk toward the edge of the camp, pausing at a section of wire fencing strung lazily between posts. The fence sagged, one corner loose where snow and time had eroded the anchor. Atlas pressed his nose against it, pawing softly at the ground. Archer crouched beside him, his large hands brushing over the wire. It gave easily, loose enough that a man could wriggle through if careful, and a dog could slip past without trouble. "We'll use it," Archer murmured. His voice was low, steady, carrying the authority of someone used to planning under pressure. He tugged Lila back toward a narrow cleft in the rocks, half hidden beneath a tangle of pine boughs. From here they could see the camp, but remain unseen. The stone pressed cold against their backs as the afternoon light dimmed, painting the snow in shades of iron and ash. Archer unrolled a small notebook from his coat pocket, the leather edges frayed from years of use. He began to sketch crude marks of the camp's layout: the generator, the stacks of crates, the fire pit, the shacks. Lila leaned close, watching silently, her lips pressed tight against the tremor of her breath. For hours, They watched. Archer noted when the men shifted, who left to relieve himself, who wandered toward the generator to refuel, who disappeared into the shacks with crates and returned empty-handed. Patterns formed, sloppy but present. By dusk, Archer could trace their roots in his head. Lila's hand tightened on his arm. "It's real," she whispered. "This isn't some story. It's right here." Archer looked at her, his storm-gray eyes grim. "It's worse than I thought. They're not hiding much. That means they don't fear being caught." The generator roared louder as night deepened, its exhaust rising like a foul banner into the sky. Lila pulled her scarf higher against the smell, shivering. Atlas shifted closer to her, his warmth grounding her against the cold. The German shepherd's gaze never left the camp, amber eyes glowing in the firelight's distant flicker. Archer closed his notebook, slipping it back into his coat. "We've seen enough for today," he said. His voice carried finality, but beneath it, resolve hardened like ice. "Tomorrow we move closer. Tonight, we remember." As they retreated into the shadows of the rocks, the camp roared with another wave of laughter. Buck Rendell's voice rang above the rest, harsh and triumphant, the sound of a man who believed himself untouchable. But from their hidden vantage, Archer, Lila, and Atlas knew the truth. Their enemy had a face, a place, and a name. The mountain had grown deathly still by the time night descended. The pale light of the moon washed over the clearing, turning the lumber camp into a ghostly tableau of shadows and flickering fire. Archer Whitman crouched low in the snow, the breath from his lips steaming into the dark. His gray eyes, sharp and deliberate, shifted from the sagging wire fence to the shapes of men moving around the fire pit. Beside him, Lila Hart adjusted her scarf, the green of her eyes visible even in the dim light. She looked fragile in her torn wedding coat, yet her jaw was set with determination. Atlas, the German shepherd, crept ahead, his body pressed low to the earth. His muscles rippled with tension, his tail frozen in a line of concentration. His sable coat blended seamlessly into the night, and his amber eyes glinted as if lit from within. Archer whispered, "Stay low, stay close," before lifting the loose section of wire. Atlas slipped through first, his body flowing like water beneath the fence. Archer followed, his broad shoulders barely brushing the gap, then extended his hand back to guide Lila. The snow muffled their steps, though each crunch felt thunderous in the silence. Across the camp, a pair of men laughed, bottles clinking, oblivious to what stalked at the edge of their world. They moved quickly toward a low shack at the far side of the clearing. The shack leaned as though about to collapse, its walls patched with scrap planks. A single lantern swung from a nail, spilling meager light over a door reinforced with rusting hinges. Archer eased it open, hinges whining faintly before the wind carried the sound away. Inside, the air smelled of grease, fuel, and damp wood. It was a tool room, cluttered with axes dulled from misuse, coils of rope, and battered crates. Against the far wall stood a crude desk littered with papers. Archer moved forward, his fingers brushing through them until he found a battered notebook. Its cover was stained with oil, the corners curling. He flipped it open. Routes sketched in heavy pencil stretched across the pages, arrows, mile markers, names of bridges and back roads. Some were circled in red. Lila leaned closer, her breath catching as she saw the notes. "They're moving shipments through the old steel bridge," she murmured. "Rosie was right." Archer tucked the notebook into his coat. He scanned the shelves and found another clue. A small box of confiscated items, wallets, knives, and, at the bottom, a cracked cell phone. He turned it over in his palm. The screen spiderwebbed but still faintly lit when he pressed the button. A list of messages blinked, all time-stamped within the last week. They mentioned deliveries, truck plates, and codes Archer didn't yet understand. Before they could study further, Atlas's body stiffened. He froze near the door, ears pricked, lips curling into a silent snarl. Archer heard it then, too. The crunch of boots on snow, steady and closing. A guard was making his rounds. The man who appeared was heavyset, his bulk filling the doorway before he even entered. He wore a thick wool jacket patched with canvas, and a rifle was slung lazily over his shoulder. His beard, black streaked with gray, curled against his chest, and his eyes were narrowed with suspicion, as though the world had taught him never to trust. A scar cut across his forehead, jagged and raw from a wound that had never healed properly. His name, though Archer would only learn it later, was Clyde Mercer, a man once known in Pinefall for his work as a logger until an accident with a sawmill left him injured and bitter. His face was the kind of face that had learned cruelty in silence. Atlas launched before the man could step inside. The dog struck like a bolt of fury, teeth locking onto Clyde's arm just below the shoulder. The rifle clattered into the snow as Clyde roared in shock, stumbling backward. His voice split the night, loud enough to carry. But Archer reacted swiftly. He barreled into the man, his solid frame knocking Clyde to the ground. Snow sprayed upward as they hit, and Archer's fist drove into the guard's gut with a force that left him gasping. "Quiet!" Archer hissed, pressing his knee into the man's chest. Atlas released on command, though his teeth dripped with strands of fabric torn from Clyde's coat. The German shepherd stood guard, lips peeled back in a low, dangerous growl. Lila, her hands trembling, acted on instinct. She seized the cracked cell phone and flipped to the camera. The lens caught everything. The fallen rifle glinting in the moonlight, the marked crates stacked along the wall, the guard's rough face twisted in rage, the plates painted crudely onto the trucks parked beyond the shack. She steadied her breath, focusing on evidence, recording each image with precision. Clyde thrashed beneath Archer's weight, cursing in a voice that rasped from years of whiskey and smoke. Archer slammed his forearm across the man's throat, holding him still until the curses devolved into choking silence. "Lila, we've got what we need," Archer whispered, his voice urgent. She nodded, her green eyes wide but steady. The phone's light winked off as she tucked it into her coat pocket. Atlas paced in a circle, ears swiveling. He growled again, short and clipped, a warning that more danger lingered close. The laughter around the fire had gone quiet. One of the men called out, his voice suspicious. Archer leaned close to Clyde's ear. "If you value your skin, you stay down and you stay silent." He pressed the man harder into the snow, then motioned to Lila. They slipped from the shack, hearts pounding. The snow had begun to fall again, heavy flakes drifting silently around them. Every step back to the fence felt infinite, each moment balanced on the edge of discovery. The silence was broken only by the drum of their hearts and the whisper of falling snow. At the sagging section of fence, Atlas pressed, forward, nosing the path he had marked earlier. Archer lifted the wire, letting Lila crawl through first, then sent Atlas. The dog wriggled under, his body taut with vigilance. Archer followed last, his hands numb but his grip unshaken. On the far side, they collapsed briefly into the snow. The camp behind them stirred faintly, voices rising in uneasy questions. But no alarm rang out. No search party came. They had been swift and silent, shadows moving through shadows. Archer gripped Lila's hand. She was trembling, but her green eyes burned with a mix of fear and resolve. "We have proof," she whispered. Atlas pressed against Archer's leg, his body a wall of warmth in the bitter cold. Snow collected on his fur, but his eyes gleamed sharp in the night. Archer exhaled, the breath white against the dark. They moved down the mountain, disappearing into the forest's hush, and behind them the camp's fire flickered on, unaware that its secrets had already been carried away into the silence of the falling snow. Morning came sharp and merciless, the kind of Colorado morning that seemed to cut through even the thickest coat. Frost clung to every branch, every rusted nail in the skeleton of the Pinefall steel bridge. The river below churned in slow currents, dark water half-iced at the edges, whispering like a warning beneath the beams. Archer Whitman sat behind the wheel of his aging pickup, his jaw tight, storm-gray eyes darting to the rear-view mirror where Atlas stood braced, paws planted firmly, amber eyes alert. Beside Archer, Lila Hart clutched the strap of her bag, her slender shoulders rigid, green eyes wide though determined. Her face, pale from lack of rest, held a courage that fought against her fear. The bridge loomed ahead like a gaping mouth. Archer slowed. Something felt wrong. The silence was too perfect, the road too empty. He knew the rhythm of these mountains, and this was not it. Atlas's ears shot up, his body stiffening, a growl vibrating low in his throat. Then came the sound, an engine revving, tires scraping against ice. From the far side of the bridge, a red pickup roared into view, newer and meaner than the worn trucks of the townsfolk. The windows were blacked out, and the grille gleamed like a predator's teeth. Behind it, another vehicle rolled into position, blocking retreat. Archer slammed the brake. His truck skidded to a halt halfway across the bridge. Figures emerged from the red pickup bed, rifles glinting under the thin sunlight. And stepping out from the driver's side was Buck Rendell himself. He wore a heavy canvas coat that stretched across his broad frame, a knit cap pulled low, and his scarred face twisted into a grin that was half victory, half venom. His pale eyes gleamed with recognition when they fell on Archer. "Thought you could sneak around me, Whitman?" Buck's voice rang across the steel beams, carrying easily over the river. "You've got something that belongs to me. Hand it over, and maybe I'll let your bride walk." Lila's breath hitched, but she didn't move. Archer's fingers flexed on the wheel. He could see at least 5 men flanking Buck, armed and restless, their boots stamped against the frozen metal, the sound echoing like drums. Atlas growled louder. Archer's eyes flicked to him. The shepherd's tail was rigid, his gaze locked on the tires of the red pickup. Archer understood. "Stay with me," Archer whispered, and then he threw the door open. He stepped onto the bridge, his broad frame squared against the cold wind. At 34, he carried the weight of years working with his hands, shoulders wide and hardened by labor. His face, marked by days of worry and sleepless nights, looked older in that moment, but his stance spoke of defiance carved deep into his bones. Buck gestured, and one of his men raised his rifle. The crack of the first shot shattered the quiet. Bullets tore into the metal frame, sparking off beams. Lila ducked low inside the truck, her hands over. Her head. Atlas leapt into motion. The dog bolted under the belly of Archer's truck, muscles propelling him like a bullet. He rounded wide, teeth bared, and lunged at the red pickup's rear tire. His jaws clamped hard, ripping into the rubber. The hiss of escaping air split the chaos. The tire sagged, and the truck tilted. One of the men swore, spinning to aim at the shepherd. But Archer was already moving. He charged forward, knocking into the nearest thug, a wiry man with a crooked nose. They went down hard on the icy steel, fists and boots scraping as they struggled. Archer's strength, honed by years in the workshop, gave him the edge. He slammed the man's wrist against the bridge until the rifle clattered away. Gunfire erupted from the far end of the bridge. Another truck appeared, this one with flashing lights cutting through the winter haze. Sheriff Maeve Carver had arrived. Maeve was a woman in her early 50s, tall and lean with iron-gray hair tucked beneath her broad-brimmed hat. Her brown eyes were sharp, carved by decades of command, and her presence radiated authority. She wore a heavy navy coat with the Pine Fall Sheriff's badge gleaming at her chest, and her voice thundered like a hammer as she shouted orders. "Drop your weapons! This is the law!" Her deputies spilled out behind her, men and women hardened by mountain life. Among them was Deputy Cole Anders, a young man of 28 with a narrow face, sandy hair, and earnest eyes that still carried the eagerness of someone new to the badge. He clutched his shotgun tightly, jaw clenched as if reminding himself to be steady. The criminals faltered. They were caught in a pincer, trapped between Buck's ambush and Maeve's advancing line. Chaos reigned. Buck roared for his men to hold ground, but panic flickered in their eyes. Atlas struck again, darting past a second truck, his body low and swift. He sank his teeth into another tire, ripping it apart with furious precision. The vehicle lurched sideways, its weight groaning against the bridge's beams. One thug spun to fire at the shepherd, but Lila had thrown open the truck door. She grabbed the fallen rifle near Archer's truck, her hands trembling but her aim true. She didn't fire, but she pointed it, forcing the gunman to hesitate. Maeve's deputies surged forward, weapons leveled. Bullets cracked, some smacking into the steel, others shattering against the frozen guardrails. The sound was deafening, ricochets singing like steel birds. Buck Rendell, realizing his position collapsing, made a desperate move. He sprinted toward the edge of the bridge, boots slipping on the ice. His breath came in white bursts, curses streaming from his mouth. He hurled himself toward the guardrail, intent on escaping down the embankment. But the ice betrayed him. His boots slid, his heavy frame careening sideways. He slammed against the rail, his arms flailing for balance. Sheriff Maeve herself moved forward, her revolver drawn, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't move, Buck!" Buck's foot slid once more, and he crashed to the ground. Deputies rushed, pinning his arms, wrenching him upright. His pale eyes blazed with hate as Maeve snapped the cuffs shut, the sound sharp and final. Behind them, the crates stacked in the red pickup shifted as the vehicle listed further. One toppled free, smashing against the steel with a hollow crack. The boards splintered, spilling their hidden cargo into the open. White bags burst apart, powdery clouds drifting across the bridge like snow within snow. Lila covered her mouth, horrified. "It's drugs," she whispered. Synthetic dust glittered on the frost, an ugly truth laid bare. Maeve's deputies secured the scene, rounding up the rest of Buck's crew. Archer stood at the center of the bridge, chest heaving, his knuckles raw. Atlas padded to his side, muzzle dusted with rubber and ice, tail sweeping once as if satisfied. Lila stepped to Archer, her hand trembling as she grasped his arm. They had survived another storm, but she could see in Archer's eyes that this was far from the end. Maeve approached, her expression grim but resolute. "You two just cracked open something bigger than Pinefall has ever seen," she said, "and we're going to need every piece of evidence you've got." Archer nodded, his voice steady despite the chaos still ringing in his ears. "You'll have it, Sheriff. Every scrap." And so, on that frozen morning, under the weight of the steel bridge and the roar of the river below, the first true battle ended. Not with silence, but with the thunder of law and the loyalty of a dog who never faltered. The first light of morning spilled across the Rockies like molten gold, washing the jagged peaks in hues of rose and fire. Snow still clung stubbornly to the pines, but the air carried a gentler note, as though the storm that had ruled them for days had finally loosened its grip. At the edge of the clearing stood Archer Whitman's cabin, humble in size but proud in its endurance, smoke curling from the stone chimney. It had been a workshop once, the place where his father taught him how to plane wood and sand beams, but now it had become something more, a shelter of truth, survival, and promises reborn. Inside, warmth radiated from the iron stove. Lila Hart sat by the window, her chestnut hair brushed clean at last, though loose strands still framed her pale face. Her green eyes reflected the dawn, tired yet luminous. A deputy medic had come in the early hours, a young woman named Clara Jensen, no older than 24, with a round face flushed from the mountain cold and quick, capable hands. Clara's brown braid swung behind her shoulders as she worked, her voice calm and encouraging. She had been raised in Pinefall as the daughter of a coal miner, known in town for her stubborn streak and her ability to patch wounds with little more than gauze and grit. She wrapped Lila's shoulder with careful precision, her gentle touch hiding a steel-hard resolve. "You'll mend," Clara said softly, tying off the bandage. "The scar will tell its story, but it won't stop you." Lila smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the medic's hand in gratitude. She was slender, her frame too small for the battles she had endured. Yet there was strength in her posture now, a quiet defiance born of surviving what should have broken her. Sheriff Maeve Carver entered then, her broad-brimmed hat in hand, her iron-gray hair gleaming in the firelight. Her tall, lean frame carried the authority of decades in law, but her brown eyes softened when they landed on Lila. She pulled up a chair, the wood groaning under her weight. "You'll be safe," Maeve promised, her voice firm. "I'll see to it myself. You're not just a bride anymore. You're a witness, and that makes you our charge." Archer, standing by the doorway, inclined his head. His storm-gray eyes studied Maeve with respect. He had seen enough of her work to know she meant her words. At her feet, Atlas stretched luxuriously, his powerful body sprawling across the rug. His sable and black coat gleamed in the firelight, chest rising and falling with steady breaths. He had been restless all night, pacing the cabin, ears flicking at every sound. Now, with dawn at the window and his humans close, he finally allowed himself to rest. Maeve reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small leather case. She knelt, her knees creaking softly, and snapped it open to reveal a gleaming silver badge. It was no ordinary token. It bore the emblem of the Pinefall Sheriff's Department, but it had been specially inscribed with words etched around the edge, "Honorary Guardian." She pinned it gently to Atlas's collar. "You're more than a dog, Atlas. You're this town's four-legged hero." The German shepherd lifted his head, amber eyes bright, and his tail swept the floor in slow, steady arcs. Lila laughed softly, leaning down to press her face into his fur, whispering, "And our protector." The cabin door creaked open, and Rosie Carter, the diner owner, bustled in. She carried a basket lined with a checkered cloth, her broad shoulders wrapped in a heavy coat dusted with snow. Her short-cropped blonde hair was tucked under a knitted cap, and her cheeks were red from the morning air. With her came the warm, spiced scent of apple pie. "Couldn't let a day like this go without something sweet," Rosie declared, setting the basket on the table. Her blue eyes twinkled with mischief. "Town's already buzzing. You two lit a fire bigger than any scandal I've ever served coffee over." Archer chuckled, the sound rare but genuine. He stepped outside for a moment, the crisp air biting his lungs. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked toward the small woodpile. There, half buried in ice, he spotted a glimmer, a simple gold band, his wedding ring. It had slipped from his finger in the chaos of the ambush days before. His large, calloused hand scooped it from the frost, and he stared at it for a long moment, his jaw tightening. When he returned to the cabin, dawn painted the walls with light. He stepped toward Lila, dropped to one knee on the rough planks of the floor, and held out the ring. His voice, rough but steady, filled the room. "We'll finish our vows," Archer said. "Not in a church, not in front of pews and stained glass, but here, where light breaks the dark, where truth still stands. Our promise isn't bound to a place. It's bound to us." Lila's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth with her hand, then nodded slowly, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Yes, and with our guardian beside us." She pulled Atlas closer, hugging the shepherd with her uninjured arm. The dog pressed against her, as if sealing the vow. Maeve cleared her throat softly, her lips tugging into the faintest smile. "Well then, I reckon we'll do this proper." She stood, tall and commanding, her presence turning the cabin's modest space into something sacred. Rosie clapped her hands, producing a pie tin as though it were a ceremonial platter. "I'll be witness and caterer," she said with a grin. They gathered at the cabin's porch, where the snow reflected the rising sun in a blaze of white and gold. Maeve lifted her hat from her head, holding it solemnly against her chest. "By the power vested in me as Sheriff of Pinefall," she intoned, her voice steady, "I recognize this vow, not as law, but as love, the truest bond this town has seen." Archer slipped the ring onto Lila's trembling finger. She whispered his name, her tears falling freely now. Atlas stood between them, tail wagging, amber eyes shining as though he understood. Rosie cheered, her laugh booming into the cold. And so, on that porch, beneath the dawn sky, the wedding was reborn. Not in grandeur, not in ceremony, but in truth carved from hardship. The fire inside the cabin crackled, Rosie's apple pie filled the air with sweetness, and laughter replaced the sound of gunfire. The townsfolk would remember the ambush, the arrests, the drugs spilled across the steel bridge like snow turned sour. But they would remember more vividly the sight of two souls, joined again not by circumstance, but by choice, choosing love after loss, choosing faith after fear. When night fell again, the stars glittered like witnesses above the Rockies. In the warmth of the cabin, Atlas dozed with his badge glinting at his collar, while Archer and Lila sat side by side, their hands entwined, their vows complete at last. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or lightning, but in the quiet ways God chooses to work. In the loyalty of a faithful dog, in the courage of a wounded bride, and in the steady hands of a man who refuses to let go of love. On that mountain, beneath snow and fear, light broke through because faith and hope endured. And so it is with our daily lives. We may not face gunfire or ambushes, but we face storms of doubt, loneliness, and loss. Yet God is still near, placing protectors in our path, reminding us that vows are not fragile words. They are living promises carried through hardship. If we hold on, if we walk forward with love and courage, dawn will always follow the darkest night. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May He guard your home as He guarded theirs, and may He remind you that no storm lasts forever. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if you believe miracles still happen, write Amen below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption.